The views and opinions of the Jonathan Kinloch Show are not those of WADL Detroit.
Welcome to the Jonathan Kinloch Show. Often we hear about questions regarding elections, and particularly how folks vote by absentee, whether or not absentee ballots have been sent out, whether or not individuals can be purged from the rolls immediately, or is there a process that's in place. So because of all of these questions that come to light around election time, I decided to say, let me go to a source. One of the best sources is in the house today. We have Detroit City Clerk Janice Winfrey, who will be here, and we'll have a conversation about purging the rolls, absentee ballots, as well as recount laws here in the state of Michigan. So stay tuned for the Jonathan Kinloch Show on the other side of this break. Welcome to the Jonathan Kinloch Show. Over the past few weeks, we've been talking about the issues surrounding Public Act 4, but specifically the consent agreement that has affected the city of Detroit by certain actions that have come out of the Bing administration. Over the past few weeks, we've heard about certain specific actions that have made an impact on the city workers. The Detroit police officers are feeling the brunt of Public Act 4 and the consent agreement because the mayor of the city of Detroit has decided to terminate their agreement and to, as some union officials are saying, violate the rights under Public Act 312, which for police officers allow for them, when there are contractual disputes, to settle their disputes by arbitration. The police union has gone to court and to ask for injunctive relief, but the courts have basically denied that relief. So too often we hear complaints as it relates to the issues surrounding Public Act 4, as well as the issues surrounding the powers that have come from this consent agreement. As I have been saying each week on this show, as well as I've been trying to say every night on the Jonathan Kinloch radio program, all roads lead through the ballot box. There are consequences that come from these elections, and this year is a very important opportunity for all of us to participate in exercising our constitutional right. There is a primary election that will be held this year in which individuals who are running for county commission, as well as state rep, as well as judicial candidates who will be on the ballot, and the people in various communities will have an opportunity to have their say. Well, we have here in the studio the person, and particularly within the city of Detroit, who is responsible to make sure that all roads go easy as you're exercising your constitutional right. We have here in the studio Detroit City Clerk Janice Winfrey, and I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here.
Well, the primary election is coming up, and as always, there's a number of candidates on the ballot. I'm not sure whether or not there are many ballot questions. I believe a lot of those ballot questions are pretty much going to be on the fall general election ballot.
We have two on this ballot. One is the millage for the DIA, and the other is a millage for, I think, the jail.
Okay. Yeah, I think it is. I think there's a renewal.
Renewal
For the Wayne County Jail. Well, we've definitely been hearing a lot about the millage for the regional millage that they're trying to create for the Detroit Institute of Arts. But what I'm finding very different this year is the activity or the lack of activity that we're hearing or seeing from these candidates. I don't get it. I know that the clerk's office has done a lot to inform folks as relates to the election, because that is your responsibility. But the candidates often are responsible for promoting themselves,
Yes,
or
they are.
you would think so. And one of the most important things that a candidate should do, and that is to mail to those individuals who vote by absentee, because they are I believe your office is expecting a pretty much low voter turnout this year.
Yeah, unfortunately, we are. But of course, we're prepared for a good turnout. But you know, you're right. Elections should be driven by the candidates, and I think in our case, in particular in Detroit, I think the finances, money is a reason that you don't see as many mailings, that you don't see as much advertising, and then you know, I think our voters are just maybe a little tired of voting, and that's why we're going to work second term. Or actually third term, our next term, we'll work with our legislators so that we can kind of consolidate some of these elections. I think an election every year on a municipality, not only is it expensive, but it leads to voter fatigue.
Absolutely.
And so we would like to see greater turnouts. And I think if we did some consolidation of elections, that can happen.
Let's talk about the issue regarding AVs. What are AVs? Let's explain to our viewers exactly what absentee voting is.
Absentee voting takes place when an individual says that I am either 60 years or older, I will not be in my community on election day, I can't go to the polls because of the tenets of my religion, I'll be in jail awaiting arraignment, or I'm handicapped.
Or we're working on the polls.
Or working the polls
Right,
on election day,
right.
absolutely.
Which I'll be doing.
Right?
Right.
Those are the reasons that an individual requests to vote by absentee. So that basically means an individual asks for an application from the Department of Election, they will receive one, and then their ballot will go to their home, and they will vote their ballot in the comfort of their homes and then mail it back to the Department of Elections. Or they can come into the Department of Election during absentee voting time and vote for the same reasons, vote absentee at the Department of Elections on West Grand Boulevard.
So those reasons that you stated are the only reasons individuals can request a ballot in order to vote.
Absolutely.
By absentee.
Absolutely. With the exclusion, of course, of our men and women in the armed services.
But you have a number of individual states around the country that allow voting by mail, as well as it's easier to be able to vote absentee in certain states.
Well, every state has their own law that they must follow. And in Detroit, we don't have early voting, which is what many states have, which is different from absentee voting. We don't have early voting. We do have absentee.
Well, the reason why I mentioned that was because the state of Michigan chose to take a look at our election laws recently, and you would have thought that they would have wanted to pass laws to have more individuals participate in the democratic process. A lot of controversy surrounded these bills, and particularly the NAACP called some of those bills that were introduced in the legislature part of the voter suppression agenda by the Republicans in many states that we're seeing. So on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about some of the changes to Michigan election law, and whether or not, ask what the clerk, Janice Winfrey from the city of Detroit, whether or not any of those changes will have an impact in this year's election. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Jonathan Kinloch Show. If you're just joining us, I'm having a conversation with Janice Winfrey. She is the clerk for the city of Detroit. She is the chief elections official for the city of Detroit, and you have your hands filled in dealing with these elections in the city of Detroit. But over the years, we've had a lot of challenges. A number of those challenges have pretty much been addressed. Both at the federal level, there's been some new laws that have talked about how to purge the qualified voter file, as well as at the local level, there has been some changes. But specifically, there have been some recent changes that have come out the legislature. What are some of those changes, and what impact will they have in these elections?
Well, Public Act 128 will directly affect us for this upcoming election and every election following. Public Act 128 says that a municipality can print the instructions for voting on the ballot or on a separate document. It gives us a choice. The importance of this for those of us who administer elections is that our greatest fear is a two-ballot election. We were very close to that in 2009 when we had over 200 candidates for city council alone in the municipal race. So they give us the choice as to put our ballot instructions somewhere else. In Detroit, we've opted to put ours on the secrecy sleeve. If you're voting in the polls, same instructions. They'll be on the secrecy sleeve. Every voter gets one. And when you're voting by absentee in the city of Detroit, we included a separate piece in your ballot instructions envelope, separate piece that speaks to how an individual should vote in terms of instructions. The other thing that we can expect that's a little different is that we now have to affirm our U.S. citizenship when we go to vote. When you're voting by absentee, it's not a real issue. If you check off that you are a U.S. citizen or not, you will still be issued your ballot. At the polls, however, you must indicate that you are a U.S. citizen if you want to receive a ballot to vote in the elections.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we won't see too much of an impact from some of these recent laws, because I also understand that the most critical of the bill of laws within the bill package was vetoed by the governor because it was part of a broader agenda by that many felt to suppress the vote in this upcoming presidential election this fall. Speaking of the presidential election this fall, what should we expect as far as turnout, and what are you doing as the clerk in getting information out about the presidential election?
Well, let me say, in 2008, Detroit was one of the top 10 in terms of cities, large cities, in terms of voter turnout for the presidential election. We expect that and more for this. So we're looking 60-65% voter turnout. We will continue to educate our voters, but the most important things that our voters need to know is it's just an election and that everything is the same.
So you're expecting a 65% voter turnout. That's quite high.
That's what we would like to, that's what we're expecting based on 4 years ago.
Okay. Well, there was some conversation about 4 years ago that there was a low voter turnout.
Not in Detroit.
Okay.
No, nationally, I think the voter turnout was like 58%, something like that. In Detroit, we were 56%. So we did very, very well. But again, we expect to do even better than that for the upcoming presidential election. And we will continue to educate our voters. You know, every presidential election, there's voter suppression tactics that arise. Things like, if you're in foreclosure, you can't vote, that's false. If you're a convicted felon, you can't vote, that's false. If you wear somebody's T-shirt, a candidate's T-shirt, well, that's always the case. You need to turn it inside out. One thing that we like to make sure that our voters know is that in Detroit, you can vote with ID, without ID, whether you're in foreclosure, whether you've moved, you can vote in the city of Detroit if you come into the polls and request a ballot.
You know, the whole point of the turnout, the guessing game associated with turnout or anticipated turnout. Now, that's tied into the total number of registered voters. Now, now that I have the city clerk in this studio, please, on the other side of this break, I definitely want to get into what is the process for purging voter rolls. That's something that a lot of folks are not familiar with. They think that you have the unilateral ability to actually remove individual names from the poll, from the poll books, and I want us to use this show today as an opportunity for you to explain to our viewers exactly how and who is responsible for purging the rolls. We're going to discuss that on the other side of this break here at the Jonathan Kinloch Show with Janice Winfrey, the Detroit City Clerk. Here in the studio, we have Detroit City Clerk Janice Winfrey. Ms. Winfrey, before the break, we began talking about the issue and the process of purging. A lot of folks believe that the city of Detroit voter rolls are packed with folks who are dead, packed with folks who should be removed, and that the city clerk should purge these files. Can you please explain to people how individuals' names are removed from the qualified voter files?
Sure. First of all, let me say, Jonathan, that that myth no longer exists in the city of Detroit. We maintain very good, clean, current voter files. But an individual can be purged in one of two ways, or their name removed from the voter list in one of two ways. If one, we hear from a reliable source that that individual is deceased. Usually that reliable source consists of information that we receive from our health department. They send us on a monthly basis a list of those individuals who have died within the city of Detroit. We can remove those individuals immediately. The other way an individual is removed from the voter files is if we send election materials to an individual and it comes back as undeliverable. That individual's name is placed.
What are those materials?
Any material that we send, a voter registration card, like we just sent voter registration cards to all of our registries.
Very nice, with a lot of very nice card.
Thank you. It allows us to clean up our voter files additionally. But if something like that comes, anything that we send out comes back as undeliverable, we put it in a cancellation countdown. If there's no activity in that file for 2 federal elections, we can then have that individual's name removed.
2 federal elections, we have the presidential elections, but every 2 years we have congressional races as well. Those are federal.
Yes, sir.
So are those part of the countdown as well?
Yes,
Oh, wow,
yes.
okay.
So 2 of those consecutive, no activity, that individual who's been in cancellation countdown can be removed from the voter files.
The maintaining of the qualified voter file, who's responsible for that?
Each municipality is responsible for maintaining their own database. So the city of Detroit, we maintain our own. We do an excellent job. Again, we work very closely with Social Security Administration, Health Department, to ensure that individuals that have died within the city of Detroit, we can have them removed from our voter files immediately.
What role is the Secretary of State in maintaining it? Because you can do some limited make some limited changes at the Secretary of State's office.
The Secretary of State removed those individuals' names who are in cancellation countdown.
Okay. Okay. Now, people, we have a number of individuals who are running around town, and particularly in the city of Detroit and in Wayne County, who are trying to receive your vote to be elected into various different offices. I'm going to say to them, and I'm going to say to you, some of the folks will lose. And guess what? You do actually lose elections. I get so tired of trying to explain to candidates that you have to reach beyond your mama, your neighbor, your sister, and your brother in order to get the votes to get elected. Bottom line is there are folks who will lose elections. Ms. Winfrey, now, when you lose elections, I just want to say this. Do not put that responsibility on us, the taxpayers in our respective communities, because you lost these elections. And it's from my perspective, our recount laws, Ms. Winfrey, they aren't really recount laws, because there are certain instances where ballots in certain precincts cannot actually be counted.
Absolutely.
Why would you even call it a recount law when you're not allowing for all ballots to be recounted?
You're absolutely correct. And Michigan is the only state in the union that does not allow for every canister to be recounted. It's shameful, it's unfortunate, and that's something we definitely will be working with our legislator with. We've been talking about it over and over. Our laws are archaic. The other thing is the cost of a recount. It costs the candidate $10 per precinct. It costs us $100 to $200 per precinct when you consider the staff that's involved in participating in the recount. So we definitely need to revisit, if you will, the recount laws in the state of Michigan.
Do you think the will is in the legislature? Keep in mind, all of the members of the legislature have to participate in the election process themselves. So you would have believed or thought that the legislature a long time ago would have actually sought some changes. So has this ever been presented to the legislature, this concern as relates to not being able to count all ballots from all precincts?
Absolutely.
And it's not just Detroit.
Not
it's
just
statewide.
Detroit. That's right. and the State's Clerks Association. We've constantly been on there. Our lobbyist works with us. We've constantly been on the legislator to do something about it, but there's been slow movement, if any at all.
What are some of the issues which would prevent a precinct from being recounted?
One of the common issues is mistakes, clerical mistakes made by the poll workers. You know, poll workers work a very long day, and at the end of the day, they have.
And they're not full-time employees. They're not regular employees of this city of Detroit.
No, they're election day employees.
Right.
Election day employees. So at the end of the day, they have to make sure that the seal number that's in the poll book matches the seal number that's on the canister to be sealed.
Exactly.
Oftentimes those numbers are transposed.
No, I'm saying they have to be exactly.
They have to be exact,
right.
Absolutely. No mistakes, they have to match exactly. So if your 0 looks like a 6, it's questionable, I'm not going to recount it. If it's supposed to be 4-8 and you put 8-4, doesn't match, it's not going to be recounted. That's the biggest reason why a canister is not recounted. Another is if you say you have, the book says we have 100 voters that registered, and then when you go through the ballots, you might have 102 ballots. Well, it's not a match. It's not going to be recounted. Very archaic laws. I don't know who it benefits, but it certainly does not benefit the candidate, not at all, nor does it benefit those of us who administer elections.
So we have elections this year, but we also have elections next year in the city of Detroit.
Absolutely.
There's going to be a big change in how the voters go to the polls and elect their council members, as well as they will, for the first time in the history of the city of Detroit, be electing 7 members of the Board of Police Commissioners who will also run out of the same districts that the council members will be running out of at the same time. So how is that coming along? Are these maps ready? Can folks go down there and actually file to run for these various positions?
Yeah, you can file. Our maps aren't ready for public viewing at this time. They will be ready, though, within the next few months for public purchase, I should say. It's working. That was part of the composition, the new political composition.
In other words, you know where individuals live within those districts.
Yes.
It's just that the paper map for distribution hasn't been printed
public
up.
Distribution
for public
has not been, is not available.
Okay, so so individuals can come now, file for council, file for police commission, file for mayor of the city of Detroit. Anybody file for mayor. No, but so that you're already prepared for next year's changes.
Absolutely,
well,
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Actually, I want to get you back in here as we move through this election process. And this is very important information for individuals to understand their democratic right and how the process works. And we will continue to do our best in keeping you informed on many of these election developments. I know of no safe repository of the ultimate power of society but the people. And if we think them not enlightened enough, the remedy is not to take power from them, but to inform them by education. Well, that's what we hope we do here each week on the Jonathan Kinloch Show, educate you and inform you on all of these issues. And we will be back with you next week, same time, same station. Have a great week.